Okay, this is the second video in this series on hypothesis testing. Now, with hypothesis testing, no matter which hypothesis represents the claim, either the null or the alternative, we start the hypothesis test by assuming that the equality condition in the null hypothesis is true. At the end of the test, one of two decisions will be made. We're either going to reject the null or fail to reject the null. Again, we either reject or fail to reject. We're dealing with a sample, so there is a possibility of making the wrong decision. We want to minimize that possibility of making the wrong decision, and don't worry about it because I'm going to show you how we describe this. There are types of error with hypothesis testing. There are a type 1 error, there is a type 1 error, and a type 2 error. If we do not reject H sub 0 or H naught, the null hypothesis, we could make the correct decision. Hopefully we will. If we reject it and it is actually true, that is what's known as a type 1 error. If we say that the null hypothesis is false and we fail to reject it, it's a type 2 error. If we say the null hypothesis is false and we do reject it, of course we made the correct decision. Then we've got the level of significance, noted by the Greek letter A, alpha. That is the maximum allowable probability of making a type 1 error, and it's the level of significance. When we choose this level of significance to be a very small value, we're saying we want to make the probability of rejecting a true null hypothesis to be very, very small. Makes sense, doesn't it? Most often we see levels of significance of 10%, 5%, 1%. Then we talk about p-values. And you will hear p-values. We will use p-values to compare. The p-value is the probability, if the null hypothesis is true, of obtaining a sample statistic with a value as extreme or more extreme than the one we determined from the sample data. There are three types of hypothesis tests. There is a left-tailed test, a right-tailed test, and a two-tailed test. The number of tails depends on the region of the sampling distribution that favors a rejection of the null hypothesis. But they're very, very easy to figure out. If the alternative hypothesis contains less than, it's a left-tailed test. Look at this. It looks like it's an arrow pointing to the left, so if the alternative is less than, it's left-tailed. If the alternative hypothesis contains greater than, it's a right-tailed test. Looks like an arrow pointing to the right. Now, if the alternative hypothesis contains a not equal to, then it's a two-tailed test. In other words, it can't decide where it's going. It's two-tailed. That's not true, but you've got left-tailed, right-tailed, and two-tailed. We're going to work some examples, but the key thing is to notice the process. We're going to set up our null and alternative hypothesis based on the claim, remembering that the claim can either be based on how it is, the claim is based on how the problem is worded or how the claim is worded. Using technology, an Excel spreadsheet, we're going to compare the p-value to alpha and determine the decision. What we're doing there is if the p-value is less than or equal to alpha, we reject the null hypothesis. If p is less, please reject. Think of that. P less looks like please. If p is greater than alpha, then fail to reject. In other words, if p is greater, wait till later, or just don't reject the null hypothesis. P is less, please reject. P is greater, wait till later, and don't reject it. Now, so when we make our decision, I've given you a number of examples where the claim is the null hypothesis. If the claim is the null and we reject it, we say there is enough evidence to reject the claim. If the claim is the null hypothesis and we fail to reject it, we say there's not enough evidence to reject the claim. Let's look and see if the claim is the alternative hypothesis and we end up rejecting the null. We would say there is enough evidence. Fail to reject the null and the claim is the alternative, we would say there is not enough evidence to support the claim. It's all in the wording. So now we're going to work a few examples starting with the Z.